No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about something that has been kind of bothering me recently, and that's that there's a lot of noise out there when it comes to anything now, because we get our information from so many different sources. And in a lot of places, there are kind of litmus tests that you can use to decide whether or not something is credible. You know, obviously something on, ABC, NBC, CBS News, you probably can give that a little bit more credibility than something you read on Facebook, and there's kind of like, in general, you have this kind of hierarchy of credibility. But I don't see a lot of that in the leadership space. And there's no shortage of people who are self-proclaimed experts in their field, top consultants for this, best-selling authors for that. We had a series last year or a year and a half ago about the 10 best leaders, for their time. And a lot of them, they were experts in their time, but if they did the same thing today, they would not be in the top of their field. They would not be an expert anymore, And so because people change, and because the needs of the workforce changes, the needs of the people change, your employees change, it seems like the credibility or the veracity of the data that's out there on people who want to be better leaders and where they should look seems to be changing. Have you ever run into something where you read something or watched something or saw something that was supposedly brilliant when it came to the art of leadership, and you went, that doesn't make any sense, and you just kind of know from your own personal experience that it doesn't make sense, and then you start to wonder how many other millions of people are seeing this and they don't have the context that I have? Like, how does that work for you?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I think that in general, kind of the shotgun approach of content from social media is such that there's a lot out there. There's a lot of it that sounds right in the idea, and so you start to pull back some of the layers and consider it. There's a lot of it that is recycled from other people. And it's a great conversation because I didn't even share this with you, but I really was thinking about highlighting a video that I watched the other day on YouTube from a self-proclaimed leadership coach, leadership person. A lot of like, I don't know, like 50,000 subscribers. Videos with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of views. And I was doing research. I was doing research for our YouTube channel. And I was like, what's out there? What do I see? What do I like? How are people approaching the content? Is it formal? Is it informal? Just doing all this type of stuff. And I'm just searching, for different leadership type of content. And I came across this video, and I was about halfway through it. And I was like, what is this person talking about? Like this whole video idea was like about helping up and coming leaders. And the advice they were giving them, it felt like he heard or he saw something. He thought there was an attachment to leadership there. And then like he hit record and just started like rambling about this. And it was very aggressive. And it was really, really like, and I had to stop it. And I was like hopefully by the end of this video, he's going to like bring this around, or he's going to talk about something here where like what he was doing was different than what he wanted to end it with. And that wasn't the case. And so I share this because, to what you're saying, like there's a lot of advice out there, and there's a lot of people that talk about leadership and leadership theory. And while sometimes bits and pieces of it make sense, if you don't have the full context, if you don't have the full idea of what this person is trying to share with you or explain to you, it can lead you down a really bad path. So even outside of it, whether or not the person is full of BS or not, just that advice itself could be damaging if you try to implement something like that. So just as an example of what I'm seeing a lot more of that's out there.
So one kind of follow-up question on that, is this advice where if you put yourself back in the mindset of, you're 18, 19 years old and you're about to take on your first team for the first time and you don't have 20 plus years of leadership experience under your belt, is this advice you look at and think, oh, there's something to this? Or is it like inherently like, what the heck is this guy talking about regardless of that? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it a dangerous video in terms of people being taught the wrong thing? Or do you think people watching it nowadays would look at it and go, yeah, that's not right, no matter where they are in their leadership journey?
What I believe he was trying to get across in the video was like, you have to have a lot of confidence. Like, you have to have confidence. You have to believe in yourself. And like, I could understand maybe where he was going with it, but it was just like, it was in the bucket of bad advice. Like I would never provide that video to any up and coming leader. And to matter of fact, like, I don't know that I would even show that video to a leader who's been around for a while, because I just don't think that the messaging was good enough to really have a positive impact on somebody trying to grow as a leader.
Right. I mean, we get a lot of requests for people to be interviewed on the show. And I count on ourselves very fortunate in that I don't think I've ever sat down with a person on an interview for the show and heard them say something where in my mind I think, this is just completely wrong. And I need to tell you now that we're editing that part out, because we can't even show that. I've never had to edit one of our interview guests ever. Like, we just put out the entire thing in its entirety. And while they may do things differently than me or than you, because everybody has their own style, I don't think there's anything I've heard from any of them that I would consider kind of objectively universally incorrect, or wrong in the context of what we're trying to do here. And so I guess in the vein of seeing how much is out there that is not good, I guess we're really fortunate that has been the case for us. But what made me think of this is I was on the new Clubhouse app that I guess is not really new anymore. It's just more and more people who are not famous get to be on it now. We get to be on it now, even though we're not famous. Yeah. I was in a room where they were talking about leadership, and I follow different clubs in Clubhouse on leadership, human resources, and things like that. And it was a very small room. But there was a half a dozen people talking about leadership, and some of the things that were being said, I found myself thinking, this is not right. That just isn't correct. And I pushed a little button to say I want to raise my hand to speak, and they turned off hand raising, which is like, you can't raise your hand to speak anymore, meaning they just want to have the conversation amongst their little group. And that was validating in some form, because it meant that they weren't there to get other perspectives. They just wanted to kind of hear themselves talk. But I can imagine someone thinking, clicking on the profiles of each of the people talking in this room and seeing some of the credentials of some of them, like people with hundreds of thousands of followers on this app, people who, self-proclaim, head of social media, head of social networking, head of this for whatever organization they work for, venture capitalist companies, all these different things. And they're giving out this advice where people would look at their background and their resume and think, oh, there's some credibility here. And the advice was just not good. It was indicative of a person who maybe implemented that advice personally in their own line of work, in their own career history. And because they were in such a situation where who they surrounded themselves with or who they were working alongside were so far back in their own careers and had so little courage to be able to speak up and say, you're full of it, that they felt validated by the lack of challenging. And so they created this environment where they could say whatever they wanted to and not be challenged. And the lack of challenge then validated that what they were doing was right when it wasn't right. And now they felt like they could go espouse that information to a lot of other people saying this is the right way to do it, when in actuality it had never been through a filter of a group of employees who have to be there while you try to implement this. And I think there's a lot of that out there, a lot of leaders out there who think their advice is valid simply because not enough people have looked at them that they have picked in their life to say, I trust you, and those people have said, you're wrong.
Yeah, well, even more so, and I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think, obviously, we're new into the Clubhouse app. I know we've mentioned it on, I think, in the last show, but obviously we've started the YouTube channel. We have a Patreon now. I can tell you that, we're doing a public show Sunday nights, and then we're going to start doing private shows for our Patreon members, which again, shout out to Mike, Stacy, Jason, Sharice, and Julie, and Dan, more Patreons. Shout outs, I had to get them in. But more importantly, there are some fantastic leaders and people on Clubhouse that I've quickly become fans of. of. And so I think that your point is a great point, because what I hear is not even that it's like non-vetted or potentially bad advice. I hear a lot of just generalities. Like, I hear a lot of advice. I hear like things around like, let's have a discussion about, what's it like to be a servant leader? And then all you hear is like the buzzwords, and it's super glossed over, and it's very general. And I'm in some of these rooms, and I'm like, okay, but what's the advice? Like I'm here not to hear you talk about what you think necessarily servant leadership is, but if you're here to try to help people, then you should also like give them advice on how they can be a servant leader. So I found myself like similar to you, raising my hand or being asked to step up on stage, as they invite people up to talk, and then kind of challenging some of those thoughts and saying, hey, like, I think a lot of people have an idea on what some of these leadership theories are, but I think what a lot of people are here to listen to is, what's the advice? How do I do that? What did what mistakes did you make? How did you get to that point in your life? How do you see leadership and that type of thing? And then all of a sudden you start to have some of that dialogue, and now the audience starts to grow and more people start to show up. You know what I mean? Like, but I think again, it's probably just because of our lens, in the way in which we do our podcast and our show, and we do our absolute best to say, beyond you and I just talking to one another about this stuff, we try to dissect it. We try to provide opinions. We try to really, give examples and tell stories of things that we've been through. And then we always try, we end the episodes with a 1-minute hack, which is like, hey, go do this, and this may help you in accomplishing what we talked about on the show. But I think that it's a great point, because if you're looking for leadership development, or you're looking for people to follow, I would say, do some due diligence and really like think about what they're saying. Besides it just being surface, and does it just sound like a good idea, or is it actually a good idea? And then ask questions, please. Like ask questions to get more specific. Say, hey, I really like what you said here. Can I give you a for instance, or can I ask you a specific example of how that could be done, or how I could do that? Start to dig, because I think at that point, one of two things will happen. Either they'll give you some really great advice and a very specific answer and an example that you may be able to take away, or they'll probably stay a little bit more general, or they'll maybe deflect the question, at which point you realize maybe this is not the best time for you to spend in a room like this or following this person, if they're not really able to give you something tangible to take with you.
Right. That makes sense. If their advice is grounded in personal experience, they should very easily be able to tell you what personal experience they had that led them to that advice. And if it's not grounded in personal experience, but rather grounded in something they heard from somebody else, or something they saw in a seminar once or read in a book, and now they're regurgitating it because it sounded good to them, it's going to be much harder for them to come up with an example of why they believe this without sounding like they're full of it. But when you see somebody, no matter what social media app or source it is, and you think to yourself, ooh, that's good advice, all you're doing is putting it through the filter of your own experience. Meaning you've come to the conclusion that it's good advice because it checks off some boxes to you. Either it validates something that you already know to be true, that you already believe to be true, or it tells you something that lets you look at your own experience through a different lens and makes you rethink it differently. And you think, ooh, that's better than the way I used to think up through it. And now I'm going to put down the way I used to do it, and I'm going to try this. I'm going to see if it holds up in the real world. And you try it, and that's how we kind of refine over time. But to a person who's being kind of bombarded with all these sources, and some of them are opt-in, like they seek out these sources because they're trying to be better leaders themselves, but they're early enough in their own leadership career where they don't have the context of a decade or more of experience to kind of put it through the filter and think, oh, I can see how that would work. They just have no experience at all. How does a person kind of sort through that? How does a person hear something that sounds really amazing to them and then stop and think, okay, I can't just assume this is perfect because the person who said it is someone I already believe in?
It's a balance of really considering the thought or the theory or the advice and how you would implement it and how you believe it would come across to a team or to a peer or whoever it is that you're looking to influence with this idea or theory. I think the other thing you have to do is bounce that up against other people that you trust. Because there's been times when I've heard something and I'm like, man, that's amazing. And I go to somebody and say, hey, I heard this the other day. It was a really cool concept. I think I like it. And that person is like, actually, no. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, have you thought about it this way? And then I go like, damn, that's a good counter. Because you know what? I didn't think about it that way. And I didn't really consider that piece of it. It just sounded good. It sounded right in the moment. And so I think that's really, that I've learned over time that's very helpful for me to be able to really consider, like, what would that look like in real life if I was to do that or follow that idea, and then have dialogue with people that I trust around sharing the idea. And if they're like, man, that's amazing, that's great, then I'm like, okay, I'm on to something. If they're like, here's why, then we can have some more dialogue and debate and to maybe decide whether it is truly something that would be impactful or not. It just since we're on the subject of Clubhouse as well, for all of our listeners, right now Clubhouse is invite only, and you have to have an iOS device, so either like an iPhone or an iPad. If you want to be on Clubhouse and you're not on it yet, please just message us on LinkedIn, whether you go to the Hacking Your Leadership LinkedIn page or Lorenzo Flores or Chris Stark on LinkedIn. Message us because it does require us to get your telephone number and things like that to be able to invite you. But we get invites pretty consistently because we're hosting a lot of shows. We're asked to be moderators in a lot of rooms and things like that. So I think like I have another 3, and I would imagine once this episode posts, like we'll have more of them. So just reach out to us and message us, and we'd be more than happy. I typically, whenever we get some, I go on LinkedIn and I put a little post up and says, hey, if you want to get in, just message us and we'll help you get in, because there is really some good spots in there, some great places to get some content. I know even though we're talking about being careful of it, we want to expose our listeners to as much, content as possible from as many great leaders out there. And then we'll cut through the things that need to be cut through as we go along. But I can tell you, if you get onto the app and you follow us, what you'll see is that we're inviting some of these other leaders that we really enjoy talking to onto our shows to come and talk and to be moderators and everything. So it'll be easy to kind of pick out and see who we believe are truly out there putting out some really, really good content.
I think that's great advice. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
Okay, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. First, I want you to go to hackingyourleadership.com and subscribe to our email list. We've got some amazing things going on this year, new platforms, new content all over the place. And if you click and you give us your email address there, we promise we will not sell it or give it to anybody else, but you will get some links to some of the things that we talked about in the episode today that we think you will really, really enjoy. In regards to what we've talked about in leadership theory, the same rules apply in life, where if it seems too good to be true, then it might just be. So when you hear some really good ideas from other leaders that are out there, I think it's imperative that you take a moment, not just remember them, but actually write them down, and write them down verbatim. Sometimes we hear something and our own filters change it to kind of fit the mold of what we want it to be versus what they actually said. So take a moment to hit pause in your brain or in the conversation, write it down, get a reference if it came from somewhere else, do some research, but really kind of dig in and consider what exactly is being said, and then question what that would look like if you were to implement that with your team, or if you were to implement that across the team. And then, as I mentioned in the episode, it's a really, really good time to bounce it up against somebody else. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mentor. It could be a friend. It could be somebody that you work with. It could be just somebody in general that you trust, that you feel kind of always gives good advice. But test those ideas in dialogue, in discussion, before you test them in actual execution. And that way you can do a little bit of mental gymnastics to prepare yourself and consider yourself and your ideas before you implement them on people, to know whether or not they may be good before you fall on your face.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack. I think we all have this muscle in us that we can exercise, and all you have to do is put yourself into the shoes of a person who's consuming information about politics. Think about the last time you heard something that was politically oriented and what your reaction was. Because it was one of three things. It was either, heck yes, that's of course true. Or it was, that guy's full of it, Or it was, that's interesting, I hadn't heard that before. It's one of those three things. And the times when it's most important to put it through that other filter is when it's one of the first two, when it's the there's no way that can be the case, or when it's absolutely, I know this to be true to the core of my being, because those are the times when we are least likely to test it out, to see whether it is valid versus just, accepting it as true because it validates something we like about ourselves. Whether it's politics or leadership or anything else, the more you can have a trusting network around you of people who you can bounce these things off of, the better you will be at being able to kind of see around corners and react to the changing needs of your teams.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.